Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to continue my series on adapting the fighting fantasy rules to a Twine game using the sword and planet subgenre of science fiction to inspire the setting and plot. So, last video we had set up the game so that, as well as choosing to play it, we can choose to have the computer run through the game either once or multiple times. And so if we choose to go through multiple times, we get a page like the one that we're currently looking at, where it says what character we're using out of the 4 that are available. It gives us our stats, and then it gives us every bit of text, every choice, every dice roll, and it keeps going until either the character dies or they reach a section which is not yet written. But the use of getting the computer to do that is not so much so that we can sort of see a single example. It's to have collated results, like how often do different characters die, which sections, if they get to an unwritten section, in other words, if they live, if they survive, which section do they end up in, and so on. So in this video, we're going to start looking at that. We have a page of these runs, as we had last video, albeit it's longer. It's a bigger page because I changed the number of runs through from 10 per character to 50 per character. But otherwise it's basically the same, except that at the bottom, if we keep, there we go. If we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we see that it tells us how often each of the 4 characters died. So character 1 died one times. I mean, it should say 1 time, but anyway. Character 1 died once, character 2 died once, and characters 3 and 4 died twice. So it's not clear whether that's a significant difference yet. We would probably have to run it, either run it a few more times or change the code so that instead of doing it 50 times, it does it 100 times or 200 times or whatever it might be. But the point is that we can now see how deadly the game is for the different characters. So we can see if the balance is off, if there's some characters that do significantly better than others, and we can also see if maybe the game is too easy or too hard for all characters. And of course that's a bit subjective because there's not a set difficulty that there should be, but we probably have an idea in our heads of how often we want the characters to survive. And we can compare that wish to what's happening in reality. With the proviso that a human player would probably play a little more intelligently than this computer simulation. The computer simulation is choosing randomly and is, for example, not immediately running away from combats that are hopeless. So they'll probably die more times than human, playtesters would. Nonetheless, it's somewhat useful. We can see that the number of deaths is very low. Most of the characters are surviving, at least till they get to an unwritten section, and we might see that as a problem. I would tend to say that we haven't really made that much of the game yet, and so I'd like to sort of do a bit more and see whether that doesn't increase the amount of deaths. But at least it gives us something to think about, just to be aware that most people aren't dying, at least in the bit that we've written, and so or not that most people, because there's no people playing it, but it seems like most people wouldn't die in the bit that we've written. So we might want to sort of bear that in mind and maybe ramp up the difficulty a little bit, maybe have a bit more loss of stamina in the things that are to come. But anyway, whatever we do with it, let me show you the code that allows it to happen. So we have a single new variable in initialize, and other than that, the changes are all on the page multi. And it's actually fairly simple how this particular one works. So the new array is $D, and as the comment says below, $D square bracket $Z end square bracket is the number of times character D died, used on multi-page. So D3 is the number of times that character number 3 died, and so on. Once we've created this array, we do a for loop that goes from 1 to 4 because there are 4 different characters, and for each one it sets DZ equal to 0. The reason I set everything to 0 is because in the multi-page, I found that if I didn't do that, if I started it as undefined, it wouldn't quite print the value properly. So I'll show you what we've got in the multi-page and talk a bit more about that. So let's get into the multi-page. Again, most of the code is the same, except that this loop here was, instead of less than or equal to 50, it was less than or equal to 10. So we just change this number, and that changes the number of times that it goes through per character. And then we have this. This is all the new code that we have within this loop, and then we have some more code down here to print out the final results. But it just says increment $D array if necessary. If $S TZ 0 does not equal, that's what exclamation mark equals means. If $S TZ 0 does not equal quote unwritten quote, then set $D square bracket $TY end square bracket plus plus, meaning increment it or increase its value by 1. And apparently, if you start with an undefined value and then keep incrementing it, it doesn't move it to 1, then 2, then 3. You have to set it to 0 to make it do what we want it to do. So why is that the way that we tell whether the character has died? Well, let's go back to the $S array. The $S array is sort of the array where most of the information about the game is stored. $TZ is the current section or the current paragraph. It always starts at 1 for each run of the game. That's done in the one-off page. But let's look at what it looks like. So we have $S for each slot. We have set $S square bracket and then the name of the section. And then each of these sections is itself an array, meaning this is a two-dimensional array. Slot 0 is the text, and then we have a series of numbers and text which define what happens once we've printed that text. And that is true unless we have, sometimes we have paragraphs that don't have any text, in which case they just say no text, and then we have the same sort of numbers and text after them. But sometimes we have paragraphs that haven't been written yet, and they, let's see where we can get one. There's one. Still have an array, but they only have one slot in the array, and that slot is just the text unwritten, lowercase UNWRITTEN. So what we do, what's happening here is it's saying, for each run through, it's saying generate a character. So roll up their skill, stamina, and luck. Include one off, which means go through this process of a one-off simulation of the game. When that's finished, have a look at what paragraph you ended up at. If you ended up at a paragraph that's unwritten, well, that means you lived, because you got, or at least you lived sort of to that point. You got to the point where the paragraph hadn't been written yet. If the game ends at any other point, then that must either mean that you've won or you lost. You lost usually meaning you die. Sometimes there's special results where you lose the game but don't die. You fail in your mission but you haven't died. But I haven't written any of those yet. So at the moment, and I haven't written any paragraphs where you have won. So if the game ends and it doesn't end because the player's found an unwritten paragraph, then it must have ended because the player has died. Once we have those sorts of paragraphs, well, we'll need to make this code a little bit more complex. We'll have to say if it equals unwritten and it's not one of the ones where you lived, in that case, we increase the relevant slot of D. But at the moment, we can just go, if it's at an unwritten paragraph, then that means they lived. And if it doesn't equal unwritten, that must mean they died. So we increment $D. And the only other thing we need to do is, of course, we need to print the results of that. There's no point just having them. We need to tell the user what's happened. So at the end, once we've gone through this loop, once we've gone through every character, and we've gone through every character 50 times, then we have a loop that goes from 1 to 4, and it says character whatever number died however many times, and I had it in bold just to make it a bit easier to see that that's an important bit. Now, I did say in the previous video, I did say that we probably want to turn off the text. But thinking about it, I changed my mind, because I don't think printing the text is increasing the processing time very much, if at all. And it lets us check that the results are correct. I actually went through, before I recorded this video, I did an example of it and I said, oh, it died 2 times. Okay, well, let's go through and make sure that it does have that character dying 2 times. So that does, give us the ability to check that it's giving us the right information, and it does seem to be. So I decided to leave the text just in case. But if we wanted to suppress the text, what we'd probably do is we'd have a variable that was set up here. It was set to 1, so we might say, let's say it's $ST for suppressed text. I think that's a variable we haven't used. We'd probably have in multi, we'd have set ST equals 1. And then in this one, in run through, where we're printing stuff, it would say if ST does not equal 1, then print it, for example. So in other words, instead of it just always being printed, it's conditional. So it will only happen on the one-off runs when we're running through it once, and it won't happen there. But and then we need to do that in the any subroutines that it might go through as well. But as I say, I don't think that's useful. I think it actually is useful to keep the text there. So that is how we test how often the player is dying or living. Another thing that we probably want to know is where they're ending up. Are they ending up? Is there one particular part of the story that they're ending up at too often or not often enough, compared to sort of what was in our head for how often we wanted particular things to happen? Well, that's what I'm going to look at in the next video, how we would collate the places where the player is ending up. So For now, though, I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.